So why are we here? Studying something called design. What is it? Why is it this clump in the midst of a whole bunch of media-based courses? Well, here's the deal, folks. This idea comes to us from Germany in the early 20th century, about the end of World War I. It comes to us from the Bauhaus. Bauhaus is a school that was founded in Germany by a host of avant-garde artists trying to come together and create a new art form for a new world. There are some strengths and weaknesses to that origin, but here's what comes to us. As fascism rises in Europe prior to World War II, Hitler and the Nazis shut down Bauhaus as irrelevant, really. They had a very old-fashioned way of looking at art, and they wanted to return to that. So most of these artists emigrate to the U.S. And a large number of them emigrated to Chicago. In particular, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, who you all know as Mies, come to Chicago. Moholy-Nagy founds what was known as the Institute of Design in Chicago, later to become part of the Illinois Institute of Technology, now ITech. Mies van der Rohe, an architect who taught there for a while, but also is simply responsible for what you see as steel and glass architecture and that revolution that is the Chicago skyline. These two in particular, but really this whole concept of an overlying, a large sort of basic course in how art works. Regardless of material and media, there are some underlying concepts that come to play. So the reason we then have this is these folks come in, they become educators throughout the country. They author a whole lot of manuscripts and ideas on how art works. And in some fashion, we want students to go through this basic course before picking a particular field in art and design to study. So that's the premise educationally. What is also apparent, though, and inherent in this, is that there is, in fact, something called a design or a creative thought process that is inherently part of all of the visual arts and design fields. So we're starting from that premise. We're going to study that process and see how much of that pertains to really where you folks are headed. And so we start at the start, design and composition. Often the question is asked, what's the difference? Yeah. There is a difference. Most artists don't express that difference. They'll use these words interchangeably. That is a horrible thing to do because they're not the same thing. Now, I'm going to tell you a simple way to tell them apart and give you this simple understanding. And somebody's going to argue with me about it. Somewhere there will be an instructor, a professor, an artist somewhere is going to argue with it. And that's fine. This is how we're going to use these words in this course. Understand, when you leave my room, when you leave our little Zoom meetings, somebody might use these words a little differently. So be prepared for that. But here's what I'm going to tell you. Design is your plan. Composition is what you do. That's it. Now, we'll explore that in a moment, but if you want the understanding between the difference of the two words, they encompass the same ideas, but one is a plan, one is the actual act of making or doing, okay? And as we step into this whole idea, composition on the left, design on the right, we're going to split parties here. The way the whole thought process works, and there are 1,000 theories on this, folks, so this is just me. I picked one that seems to work for me. It seems to keep it simple enough that it makes sense in a class. Somewhere along the line, you get the impulse to make something. Now, that might be a problem you encounter, an issue, a challenge, an opportunity, or a teacher giving you an assignment. Oh, that would happen. Okay, that's really how the course is going to run. I'm going to provide some kind of an impulse to you guys to make something. And you'll engage in this thing called divergent thought, which is to just imagine possible solutions to this whole thing without regard to anything else other than, gee, what would be nuts to do, right? What would be different? What would be exciting? What would I like to try? That then gets balanced through a process called convergent thought, which is to focus your thinking based in part on possible solutions and opportunities in the context you're working in. What's available to you? What's your time frame? It's a matter of practicalities most of the time. And then you simply select something through that convergent thought process. And you experiment. You make something. You take out a sheet of paper, you make some marks on it. You take out a lump of clay, you press it into a shape, right? When you call it done, when it seems to have balanced between what you wanted to do and what you're trying to do, and you get it to some state that looks like it might be completed, you sit back and you look at it. Fancy academic term is to assess it. The artistic term is to critique it. Now, that might be all by yourself in the studio, and it always happens that way. But it might also be by bringing it in front of friends, family. I call my wife in here an awful lot to look at stuff when I'm working. Is this doing what I think it's doing? Where it also works out well is in the classroom. We are going to do critiques of everything you do and possibly multiple critiques on what you do. Why? Because if you get information from that assessment, it comes back, clarifies the impulse and the diversion, and this loop keeps going, right? It gives you feedback. So it might kick you back to experiment. It might kick you forward and try something totally different. But it gives you something to work with, some idea of how the work functions in a context outside of your own little world. Because the world doesn't revolve around the way you alone think. In that, we're going to deal with 4 basic ideas here in the design world. 4 words, 3 C's and an F. Sounds like a bad report card. It's not. This is just a way to remember it. Just remember the bad report card, and that'll help you remember all 3 of these. Form is the tangible artifact resulting from a fulfilled design. It's the thing you end up with. It's the artwork. Okay? What form did it take? It has to do with the materials, the dimensions, the velocity, all of that kinds of stuff. All right? It's the final thing. The 3 C's, the 3 cons. Content, context, and concept are as you see them here. Content is the experience or values you're trying to express or share through that work of art. The context and the concept. The context, there are circumstances and experiences that define the identity of your audience, first of all, and the constraints upon your form. Now, here's a newsflash for you. There is no such thing as a universal audience. This is the biggest lie perpetrated on mankind. We all approach the world with biases. We share biases. That's what makes us a group. So those things can be based on location, socioeconomic position, politics, religion, gender, education, language, vocation, and things like that. This is not an all-inclusive list. There are hundreds of things that can impact the context of the work. The second thing that happens is it puts constraints upon the form. And people think that's means that there's some sort of weird prohibitions or something. No. Guess what, folks? You can't put a 14-foot painting on a 13-foot wall. That's a constraint. It constrains the form. Where are you putting the work? What are you doing? Right? If your budget is $250, you're not doing a wall full of gold leaf. Just saying. You have to work within the context you've got, right? So that context is both the audience definition and as one component of that bigger picture context of where you're working. Where's the work going to land? How does it interact with the audience, right? The last thing is the concept. This is your initial idea or approach to the impulse to create. It's that thing that came out of the convergent thought, right? You got a concept. Doesn't mean that you have a composition. The expression you're making it, that's where the composition part happens. You've got an idea, a way to approach the problem. Every detail may not be worked out, but you have an idea. That's it. And it all interacts like this. Isn't that a great diagram there? Yeah. Form bounces content, and each one interacts off of the other and across the axes. Now, the axes are important because form and concept interact very heavily and directly as sort of a balance, one to the other. You're trying to balance form and concept, and you're trying to balance the content and the context. So perhaps it does us a better service to do something like this. We understand that form and concept are balancing one another, and that content and context are balancing one another. We've got to balance the content and the context in order to create a form. And the concept is the way we're approaching it. So there you go, folks. That's it. That's what we're all about in this class. Now, how are we going to approach this class? Somewhere in all of the assignments I give, I'm going to restrain one or more of these, and that's simply to get you to explore how the other works. When we get towards the end of the class, I'm going to give you an impulse and cut you loose. And this, here it is, for all of its beauty and thoughtfulness, is my biased opinion on what it is to make a work of art. The arts are those designed human activities that pay homage to something the creator contemplates, put into abstracted form, and passes along to an audience. This something might be the way lovers feel towards each other, the faithful awe one holds towards God, the possible variations upon a theme, the deconstruction of time, or the way the color red looks on a cool white field. In any case, time and resources are dedicated to making something that may or may not have an immediate material benefit other than expressing the significance of the concept contemplated through the design process, resulting in a new form that embodies this content and presents it to an audience. Whoop, there it is, folks. That is 34 years of dancing with this course content. You show this to another instructor, they'll probably argue it somehow, some way. That's okay. I give you this because it's my bias. It seems to work for me. It seems to make some kind of sense. Hope you find this useful. Now let's get to work.